Hello, and welcome to this, the first online Songs and Sounds concert. Thank you so much for joining us. Our chosen theme for this concert is motherhood. So, in classical music, the subject of motherhood or presenting ideas and feelings from a mother's perspective is relatively rare. There are dedications and depictions of mothers in a certain light, but they rarely delve deeper into what being a mother actually means. As music has evolved, however, so has our capability to talk about our experiences, good and bad, and it feels it's generally more acceptable to do so. Contemporary music has begun to react accordingly, making music reflect our newfound openness and exploring, to a far greater extent, motherhood and all it entails. It felt particularly relevant to focus on this theme now, as I know from experience that being a mum has certainly felt rather challenging over the last few months, as we juggled the many roles that we are expected to adopt: carer, comforter, cleaner, provider, teacher, all while feeling a huge sense of isolation and possibly even abandonment, as we were required to distance ourselves from potential support systems. We hope that this concert and part two, which will follow at the end of the month, end of next month I should say, will not just resonate with mothers but help to bring new music to all into the foreground. The composer's website addresses will be available at the end of the concert, so feel free to explore further. Our concert today has music by three composers: Jenni Pinnock, Emily Hall and Ben Graves. We also have a reading of a wonderful poem by Kathryn Simmonds. We included these particular pieces as we believe that they highlight different aspects of motherhood in different ways. You'll hear the pieces and interviews with the composers themselves. If you have the time, please do join us for the whole of this stream, but if not, we have included the schedule in the description. So feel free to return when it's convenient and watch it at your own pace. So, to begin our concert, we have Blessing of the Road-Born Child by Jenni Pinnock, performed by myself, Donna, Lennard, and Ben Graves on clarinet. I had the opportunity to speak to Jenni about this piece a few weeks ago, and here's what she had to say. Oh, hi Jenni, and thank you so much for being here today and for answering a few questions about your piece, Blessing of the Road-Born Child. So yeah, I was lucky enough to be involved in the premiere of the song cycle in which this piece features, called Cracked Voices. I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit about it, what it was all about, who you collaborated with.
Hi Donna, thank you for having me. Cracked Voices is a song cycle comprising of 12 songs written for soprano, baritone, clarinets and piano, and it explores the histories of forgotten people and forgotten events around Hertfordshire, Cambridgeshire and Bedfordshire. It came about as a result of a discussion that started on Twitter, oddly, between myself and writer Graham Palmer, and we talked for a while about collaborating and about working together on a project. And eventually we finally met up and he sent some texts over and we started collaborating and wrote a couple of pieces. And from there, I think we both realised that this relationship had the potential for something bigger. And we decided to work on a larger scale project. And that's how Cracked Voices came about, to do with Graham's passion for discovering all these local quirky stories and my love of art song.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I think, yeah, Graham's text, his poetry is very evocative and very beautiful as well in places, and the way he uses words and his language to depict all these stories, all these amazing stories that happened in those local areas. I think that's what I found so interesting about it, is that you'd managed to uncover all of these incredible stories just in a local area. I'm from Bedfordshire, and yet I had not even heard of any of these stories before, so that was something that was very, very interesting. But thinking more about going back to Graham, I suppose, how did you find the process of writing songs with Graham? Was it easy to set your music to his text, or was it a relationship that required a little bit more work?
From the outset, Graham and I worked really well together as a team. He would tell me about the ideas of stories he had, and I would start thinking about musical ideas. And then eventually he'd send over a fully formed text normally. Sometimes it was a draft or a few snippets, but normally fully formed. And I'd then spend some time getting to know it, getting to know the words, getting to know the syllables. And I would send back a sketch of the music. And normally we saw eye to eye pretty quickly. Occasionally there were times when we didn't necessarily agree on something, and we'd work on it together until we found a solution we're both happy with.
I think that's what really came through with working on this project, is just how collaborative it was and how easy you guys found working together. I think there were some times when you'd be listening to something that we were singing, and you'd both think, either of you would think that something didn't quite work, and yet a solution was always found really, really quickly, and with very little ego, very little preciousness about what you were creating, which was really refreshing. It was lovely to see how well you guys worked together. So the cycle itself, it features, as you mentioned, it features songs for baritone, soprano, for piano and clarinet. So why that particular ensemble? Because it's sort of different to your normal song cycle, I suppose.
It's quite a different collection of instruments for a song cycle, I agree. From the outset, we knew we wanted both male and female voices in the cycle, so that's where soprano and baritone came from. And we also knew we wanted another instrument to add some different colour here and there. And I think while writing one of the pieces, suddenly the idea of a bass clarinet came to me, and I thought, that's it. And you have the bonus, if you use a clarinetist, that provided you pick the right instrumentalist, the right performer, you can use the whole variety of clarinets, which opens up such a wide scope.
Yeah, I think that was what was lovely. I've done a few concerts in the past with clarinet repertoire, and it's been so nice to actually sing with a clarinet. I've never, we do a lot of song with piano, but just to do it with a sole clarinet, you find new resonances. You find that your voice kind of works in a very different way when paired with a clarinet. And as you say, you use the whole range of clarinets, which actually they're all different voices, and they just add to the voices, the cracked voices that you portray in the cycle as well. So I think it worked really nicely. Thinking now specifically of Blessing, what can you tell us about it, and why did you choose for this song just to have soprano and clarinet?
The Blessing of the Road-Born Child is the story of Anna and baby Maria. Anna Holtzman came to the UK in December 1904. She was a refugee, and she was moved along with the other refugees who travelled with her from county to county, as the police in one area would decide they didn't want them, would move them to the county line, so they had to move on. And in the snow in March of that year, baby Maria was born. And sadly, although she appeared healthy to begin with, she developed very bad catarrh and died at 8 days old. The blessing is the mother's blessing, is Anna's blessing onto Maria. And from the outset, I wanted it to be a very passionate, very raw piece of music. And it didn't seem right to have a standard piano accompaniment. I even toyed with the idea of having it completely unaccompanied, but that didn't seem right. The combination of voice, of soprano and clarinet just seemed perfect. So that's what it became.
I think it's quite a powerful piece, really, and it resonates with things that are happening today about this idea of kind of refugees and the innocent people that are involved in such terrible things. We could talk a lot about that now, I'm sure, but yeah, and I think the use of the clarinet just on its own, as you say, it feels right to have some colour there, but at the same time there's also a sparseness. There's space in between the vocal and the clarinet line that it sort of almost feels quite uneasy, and it feels there's an emptiness there, a loss, which works really well with the text and and the context behind it as well. Yeah, it's a lovely song to sing. But yes, anyway, finally, how have the last few months affected you as a composer, but also as a mother?
Well, the last few months have obviously had a huge impact on me as both a mother and a composer, as they have on everyone. To begin with, I was doing a lot of walks with my family, very long walks around our village, a lot of crafting and a lot of homeschooling, which was all wonderful stuff, and it was lovely to have that break from the world in a way, just a very different way of living. But at the same time, I got very little composing done. Finding time was a real issue. As time's gone on, I'm finding more time and more space to do it. And although some of my projects have been cancelled or postponed, I'm very lucky that I've got a few that are still in place. So I have had things I've needed to work on. And I'm also lucky that I've still managed to find ideas and be creative during this time. So I know some composers have really struggled with that. But I've managed to keep going. What I have struggled with is actually finding time to develop ideas and to take them forward. So I'll come out of lockdown with a huge book full of ideas and full of sketches and themes and things I could do, but I need to actually make them into fully fledged pieces now. So I've just got to hope that as an industry we can find ways to be creative and to thrive in this strange new times we find ourselves in.
Absolutely, I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you so much, Jenny, for letting us present your piece in this concert, and thank you for answering some questions today. Thank you.
When 6 o'clock comes and another day has passed, The baby who cannot speak speaks to me. When the sun has risen and set over the same dishes, and the predicted weather is white cloud, the baby steadies her head, which is the head of a drunk, and holds me with her blue eyes, eyes which have so recently surfed through womb swell, and all at once we stop half-heartedly rowing our boat, and see each other clear in the television's orange glow. She regards me, the baby who does not know a television from a table lamp, the baby who is so heavy with other people's hopes she has no body to call her own, the baby who is forever being shifted, rearranged, whose hands must be unfurled and wiped with cotton wool, whose scalp must be combed of cradle cap, the baby who has exactly no memories, softens her face in the early evening light and says, "I understand."
There used to be a woman in this body, not just milk. There used to be a substance to her living, not just milk and carrying. There used to be a life that was outflowing, not just milk and carrying, and saying, hush. There used to be a flowering of action, not just milk and carrying, and saying hush and putting down. There used to be a world still to discover, not just milk and carrying, and saying hush and putting down and worrying. There used to be a world, not just milk and carrying, and saying hush and putting down and worrying and milk. That was Not Just Milk by Emily Hall. As with all the other music in this concert, we're taking the opportunity to ask each composer a few questions regarding their music. So, Emily, thank you so much for being here and allowing us to perform your music. The song itself, it's part of a song cycle called Life Cycle, which is made up of 19 different songs, which deals with aspects of motherhood that are rarely touched upon in music. Very perhaps powerful, but also very personal and very intimate. I just wondered where the idea came from, and was it at all shaped by personal experiences?
So Life Cycle came about sort of informally, actually, in collaboration with a writer, Toby Litt, in 2008. This was the time when I had my first child, my son Joseph. Toby and I had started working together a couple of years before. We wrote a song cycle together, a set of songs about love, and generally hit it off as friends as well. And he didn't live too far from me, and we got in the habit of sort of meeting quite regularly and talking about ideas for future projects, or just generally, chewing the fat, really. And I went over to his place with my I guess 2-month-old son. Funny enough, I remember the journey very well because he screamed all the way. Not Toby, the baby. He screamed all the way there. I remember feeling very frazzled by it. It wasn't far, a couple of miles really, but just that in itself had, really, I think I was pretty on edge, to be honest, when I went there. And then there was a sort of awkwardness of, breastfeeding and knowing Toby quite well, but not that well. And, it was all these typical first time mum things that were sort of happening right there, really. And this kind of led to a conversation and about, what I was going through, basically, this transformational time, which is, obviously both wonderful and terrifying, at the same time. And we talked, and to be honest, we didn't really sort of make a plan to then write a piece. This is sort of quite typical of Toby. He just sent me some lyrics, I don't know, a couple of weeks later, and I loved them. And I think this coincided with me being asked to write some songs for a project Opera North was putting on, and so it all kind of clicked together. And I said, "Hey, why don't we do this?" Which was fantastic. So we started off writing, I think, only about 7 of the songs. This was for a singer called Mara Carlisle and pianist Sarah Nichols and cellist Oliver Coates. And these were premiered, and I think just because we felt there were things that hadn't been explored quite enough, or we wanted to make it really cover all the ups and downs of becoming a new parent. So we sort of fleshed it out and added songs, and then it grew into Life Cycle.
As you said, you've worked with Toby Litt before, so that working relationship was already there, but and already been established. But tell us a little bit about that collaboration.
It's really, for me as a composer, it's really interesting and exhilarating working with living writers, especially when you sort of have the concept together and then they go off to write it, and you're just never sure what's going to happen, if it's going to be something you can work with or not. With Toby, I've worked with many writers now. With Toby, it's always been very straightforward. He's not precious about me changing, whole lines, cutting, pasting. He's not precious. He understands that when you are when you're designing a song, you know, you need to have that freedom to let the music speak. You know, you can't be wedded to exactly what the writer has constructed, and he completely understands that. And we've just always had a nice flow. You know, I always send him initial demos, and I really value his feedback. He's, you know, a big music lover as well, and it's always a really positive collaboration, actually. And, you know, consequently, after Life Cycle, we then wrote the third part of our trilogy together, which is about death. It's a secular requiem called Rest. And so, you know, it's been fantastic, and you know, we continue to work together now, actually.
Yeah, it's wonderful that collaboration with Toby is ongoing and is constantly developing as well. I think it's really important that once we make these connections, that they continue to grow and to bloom, I suppose. Thinking of another collaboration now within Life Cycle is that of Mara Carlisle, who was the singer you mentioned before. So she was a singer who premiered Life Cycle. For me, her voice, it really helps to bring feeling to the music and the text in the way that she sings and her style of singing. Did you write with her voice specifically in mind?
So I did indeed write the work for Mara Carlisle. I was introduced to her through a friend, and I think my friend just was keen that we might have a sort of creative future together, and she was absolutely right, because I've written a lot for Mara. She you know, she sings with such feeling and understanding of what she's singing about. We have the same range, actually, which I must say really helps, because when I compose, I'm always singing, and yeah, so just the fact that I'm not then having to transpose is really actually really key, because I think when you transpose music, it just changes. It's not the same. So that's been really nice. I feel like she's my kind of oracle. I mean, I sing, but I'm not a singer. But she, you know, she really is, and she has, you know, a special gift. And yeah, so that it was very much written for her. But having said that, you know, it's been sung by lots of different sopranos now, and I am always amazed by what other singers bring to the piece, and sort of I really enjoy the variety and taking it into different places. So yeah, it's flexible in that way.
Yeah, I think flexibility is really important in music. I think as a performer, it gives you the confidence to know that you can try and make your own mark on the music, and, you know, obviously within reason, but it gives you the space to explore and to develop and to play and to really get under the skin of the music itself. So to know that the composer is actively encouraging that, I think that's really helpful. So the cycle itself, it doesn't feel like a classical work in sort of the traditional sense, I suppose, but mostly due to Mara's vocal delivery, but also in the way that it was staged. So it had its premiere in 2011 at the South Bank Centre, and I've seen videos online of some of the staging, and it, you know, at times Mara was sitting, just singing there, you know, sitting and singing, and then there were these beautiful kind of projections sort of surrounding her, and the lighting was very dimmed, and it all came together just to make it feel very very intimate. and intensely personal as well. Was that always your intention?
So yes, it's not classical in the traditional sense. I mean, I think this is possibly true of the majority of my music, actually. I think I am one of these composers that falls in a funny place. Partly I was trained classically, but I've always loved folk music, and I've always listened to a lot of folk and alternative pop music. And yeah, I don't think I don't quite fit in any of those categories, and so my music just always sort of turns out somewhere in between. And I guess the fact that, you know, there were aspects of the text that I had been through. I mean, it's not at all. It's not specifically about me, and there's things in there that, you know, I didn't go through. So, but I think, you know, I think the feeling, the sort of sitting at my piano and coming out with the songs, you know, from a place of, you know, having, you know, being in the midst of having, you know, my first child probably makes it quite a true work in that way, and in an intimate way. So I think that does, and personal, exactly. I think that does communicate in the piece, definitely.
So finally, how have the last few months affected you personally and as a composer?
The last few months, yes. Well, as a composer, it's been quite good in some ways. I experienced quite quickly a sort of sharpening of intention. I think I sort of, the fact that all the things in my life that keep me busy slipped away. I think I felt this sense that I, you know, knew maybe what I wanted to focus on next, how I wanted to do it, how I want to, you know, I've sort of got these concrete ideas now of my next album and how I want to work. So I feel like there was a sharpening of intention. On the flip side, obviously, my children haven't been to school since March, and yeah, you know, there's been less time. I've been able to share that with my partner, and he's been able, because he normally travels a lot for work, he's been able to do a fair amount of, he's a sound designer, he's been able to do a fair amount of production on various recording projects of mine. So yeah, it's had its pros and cons. Obviously quite a lot of concern about the industry in the future. We'll just have to adapt, you know. And yeah, on a personal level, I think I am probably mostly introvert, probably 70% introvert, maybe 75. So it's been fine for me. I've actually enjoyed feeling less diluted, I think, by, you know, running around doing things for my kids, things that I think I need for myself, but perhaps don't. So yeah, it's been all right, I must admit. You know, very fortunate, obviously, not to be on the front line, and not to have any kind of fear of redundancy, which I know a lot of people are going through at the moment. So yes, it's been okay, and basically sort of day by day has been the best approach, I think. Anyway, I did really want to say thank you so much for including my song in your concert, and I'm really glad you chose Not Just Milk, because actually I think this is probably my favourite song in the cycle, and definitely the song which is probably the most autobiographical for me. That sort of feeling of endless feeding and frustration, and really brings, when I hear it, it really brings back a lot of feelings. So yeah, thank you so much.
The next interview you'll hear is with composer Ben Graves about his piece La. Now, while this interview was conducted over a live Zoom call, so our faces are a little pixelated, unfortunately, you will hear about Ben's process in writing this piece, which he did only a couple of months ago. It was a collaborative piece, and it was in response to the current circumstances that we all find ourselves in. Now, while Ben is not a mother and not even a parent, we decided to include this in the concert as it has the overarching theme of loneliness. And loneliness is something obviously that can affect anybody, but for mothers specifically at the moment, it feels that while, as I mentioned at the beginning, while those support systems are unavailable to us at the moment, those with children, young children particularly, it can feel like a very lonely time. You can feel very isolated indeed, and that's what Ben's piece looks at. So that's why we decided to include it in this concert of motherhood, because it feels like it's still very much relevant. So here we are, here's the interview. Finally, we have a piece by Ben Graves called La. Now, this piece is very different to the other two stylistically, but it does touch on some familiar themes. So, for instance, the current circumstances that we're all dealing with at the moment, but also for mothers as well. So mothers, there's a sense of loneliness, but the overarching theme of Ben's piece is loneliness, I believe. So I think that's something that all mothers can definitely relate to at some point or another. So, Ben, we went to Guildhall together about 10 years ago now, which makes us feel very ancient. So we've known each other for a long time, and we've worked with each other a couple of times before as well, a few times. So I had the pleasure of collaborating with you a little bit on this piece, but where did the idea come from originally?
Well, I was actually listening to the radio, and they were discussing with a composer who was having a premiere for soprano and ensemble. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, that premiere had to be curtailed because the soprano needed some 7 meters, technically, because of the projection of her spit, essentially. Social distancing in order, for the kind of spread of the virus. And therefore, his solution was to, for some unexplained reason, take the soprano part and put it on the vibraphone. And so I initially started wondering what would happen if why wouldn't she wear a mask? What would the sound be different? And then the idea would be to play, therefore, create a piece that could be performed with a mask on, or should be performed with a mask on. And beyond that, because the performance of his new arrangement of his piece be put online, we create a piece that kind of, if you like, works via Zoom, fundamentally. Yeah. Mask, Zoom, social media, social kind of, mask and Zoom.
Yeah, so I should have mentioned actually in the introduction. So this piece, it involves the soprano having to wear a mask throughout. So that comes with obviously its own challenges, but we'll speak about that in a moment. But how did you come across E. Cummings's poem? And why did it feel right for this particular piece?
So the mask in and of itself, one of the problems, aside from actually muffling the sound, changing the sound of your voice, what it also does is it kind of dehumanizes the act of speaking. There are a lot of people that have had problems with mask wearing in public because it masks a significant part of the expressiveness of the face, and people that maybe rely more on, for example, lip reading. And I think we, as understanders of words, actually rely more on the shape of the mouth as well as the movement of the face in order to kind of understand what people are saying, get the wider context of the things people are saying, and that's taken away by a mask considerably, and a lot of people find that very uncomfortable. And so I wanted a poem that took away words, and E. Cummings was the first poet that I thought of as somebody who dissects words into syllables, but also creates them into a visual work of art as much as they are a poem. He very much was a poet that appealed to the modernist composer. Berio is a perfect example, with a piece for soprano, harp and percussion, I think, called Circles, because they didn't want to be subservient to text anymore. They wanted to explore the voice as a percussive or as an instrument, you know, a thing, a creator of music rather than a creator of words. And that wasn't the aim with my piece. But what I did want to do is find a text that would remove, that would kind of focus less on the actual physical words themselves and more on the sounds created. And the more I thought about Cummings, the more I realized he had the perfect poem, and it is almost the poem of lockdown. And the whole poem is the letter L on the top line, a bracket, an A, which is La. You know, hence why Donna called the poem, you called the poem La, because that almost invited me to make it a song. On a level. Then the next line, I think, is an O. And so it says loneliness, but then loneliness, the letter L, open bracket, a leaf falls, close bracket, onliness. And what he does is he isolates each of the letter L's. So I think there's 4 of them. A leaf falls. He's got one letter, and that letter L he deliberately makes lowercase so that it looks like the number 1. As in, they say 1 is the loneliest number. He also takes the 1 out of loneliness. He takes 2 L's, lonely, I think there's 2 L's there, and then he takes the L's out of a leaf falls. So he not only isolates syllables, i.e. makes them lonely, he isolates number 1s, or L's that look like number 1s. He constructs the poem in the shape of a number 1. Some people think that the image of the poem, if you like, looks like a leaf falling, and then the leaf falling is a quite universal symbol for, if you like, the movement from summer into autumn, the death of the leaves, even though the trees obviously do it deliberately in order to save themselves from using too much energy. The leaf falling and dying is kind of used as a metaphor for kind of death, really.
Absolutely.
And loneliness of death. There's been a lot of people during lockdown who have died lonely.
Absolutely.
So this E. Cummings poem takes on even more meaning, because, you know, people are lonely, people are self-isolating. Cummings has expressed this. And then finally, the name Cummings has quite a significance during lockdown, but through no fault of the poet, obviously.
Absolutely. I very much like, if I can just show here, on the very top of the piece of music, we have text E.E. not Dominic Cummings. So there we go.
That was your eyes only.
Well, now everyone can see it. So there we are.
Music.
So yeah, it's very, very interesting. And yeah, the poem itself, as you say, to look at it, is very visual, but the dissection of it as well, it's such a clever
There's
thing.
a lot, if you look at it within the anthology itself, or an anthology, there is a lot of white space. And the poem exists on the visual plane as this small smudge of black amongst the vast expanse of white. There's another, you know, like there's so many layers and depths to his creation, and it kind of is beyond poetry and into the, you know, and he was very, as far as I know, my limited knowledge of poetry, one of, if not the first, to really explore the visual implications of poetry. And the sound, as well as, you know, these, he made it, if you like, three-dimensional, if that's the right, rather than just, and indeed it's also very influenced by the haiku, but you know, that's another.
Yeah, that's another. But then, how did you try and approach that text as a composer about transforming all of those layers into a song?
I kind of liked the idea of adding another dimension to it. I'm not going to say a fourth dimension, because that makes sense in physics. So what Cummings had was a poem that worked in the visual, and it worked in the oral. You know, if you try and read it, you find yourself, like with poetry, you often are encouraged to read them out loud in order to chew over the syllables. He turns that up to 11. You know, you chew over the syllables because he tells you where and like how to chew them. And it works, obviously, you read it as well. So I added music to it just insofar. But because I kind of was invited to move between the syllables, I kind of chose almost to make it into what I felt was a reading of the poem, how I'd feel, almost in a kind of a troubadour sense, whereby poets once upon a time sung their poems. It was almost like that, and the way there's quite an interesting movement in poetry now, where people go back to that quite medieval notion of singing their poetry. Often, if you like, the music is quite simple, but I felt that a lonely poem needed quite a lonely piece, and so the harmony is very simple. It's just the letter E, the note E, as in E coming, and then I think you descend to a C, and then the E kind of fluctuates in and out of its tuning in a way to isolate you, Donna, the singer, from the note that you start on, and if you like, this safeness of the note E. But also the actual text setting is relatively conservative in a way, insofar as that I think if you sang it as written, but then you almost sped it up, you would actually sing A Leaf Falls. You would probably be heard singing A Leaf Falls, but you slow it, but it slowed itself down again in the rhythm. And so it's kind of like, you know, you speed it up and suddenly it's A Leaf Falls, as well as the la and the onlyness at the end. You know, so I could kind of take that Berio idea of turning you into an instrument, but actually you're more of a singer in slow motion. And that is also reflected in the lack of breath, because obviously coronavirus is a lung disease. And so I didn't want to allow you the comfort of breathing where you want. And so I kind of encourage you to extend, just sing it for as long as you possibly can. Technically it's impossible, you know, but it's kind of like you often encourage woodwind players to stagger breathing.
Yeah.
Well, you know, coronavirus, if you like, you imagine people staggering to get breath.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
Can't breathe, you know, it kind of takes on a whole new meaning of this term, staggering breathing. You have to stagger your breathing, but of course the idea of staggering breathing is amongst an ensemble where your breathing is staggered with the other people, so that you kind of create the illusion of one long breath. Well, you don't have that luxury because you're on your own. You're singing it and you breathe when you can. That's kind of essentially what stagger to an individual member of an ensemble, brass wood, a breathing ensemble, or even a choir, I think. You breathe where you can in order to disguise the fact that you're breathing. So you're alone in that you're breathing on you're not breathing with your ensemble when you're staggering your breathing. You're breathing, you're hiding the fact that you're breathing, not breathing. Whereas you can't hide that because you're on your own.
Absolutely, yeah.
I had to think about, because then, you know, the mask obviously obscures, you know, we found as we were working on this piece together, didn't we, that Zoom adds another dimension to, in a way, this text setting, insofar as you can't really tell where the ambient noise of Zoom ends and Donna singing begins. And the mask only acts to obscure that, as well as, if you like, dehumanizing your voice.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, yeah, it's such an interesting piece, because even though to look at it, it seems relatively very simple, to actually perform it's very, very difficult, because of that elongated, and also, well, the elongated lines, but also the fact you've asked for stillness as well without vibrato, and so then to try kind of to maintain that sound, the quiet sound, but then stretch it and then try and breathe, as you say, when you can as well, with the added element of this mask, you know. And then I found a couple of times when recording it, I'd breathe in and my mask would come with me. So then,
there's another element.
Another element.
You almost made a rod for your own back with this when you told me that you just found it so hard to maintain that E. You got disorientated.
Yeah.
Trying to maintain your tuning.
Yeah.
And in a way, that was an element that, unfortunately for you, I decided to play with even more by adding more detuning elements in to disorientate you even more from your original, if you like, home key, your home pitch of E. You know, and almost what results only heightens the harmony. I would have kind of enrich the harmony, I suppose.
Absolutely.
By pure accident.
Yeah. I think, it's interesting because we spoke just before this about recording for online concerts and things, and how there is this idea of when you're recording, you're looking for some sort of perfection. And I found myself, when recording this, trying to get that tuning absolutely right, getting, you know, that, make sure all the dynamics and everything, you know, was as written. But it's interesting then that, you know, you listen to that and you were just, and it must have taken me a long time to get that right. And then you took it and you were like, actually, can we change that? Can we let's change it even more? But it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because I think also that worry would only be we were saying, because you know, I had the pleasure of recording Jenni Pinnock's piece, but in a way it was pleasure and pain, because I knew I needed to do it in one take, and that almost makes you make more mistakes, and it makes you very worried. And there are, I'm sure, mistakes that creep in. And whereas you do it live and you forget all that, and you're then in the moment of performance, and the irony is you're less likely to make mistakes, as far as I can tell, when you then perform them. Whereas I think this piece, even if you were to do it live, that fear would maybe still grip you in a certain way, because you're on your own. Again, you're isolated. You've got no point of reference for your pitches. So even if you're trying to maintain an E, you haven't got anything to tune to. Again, you're lonely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, I almost thought about adding a few extra voices, because that would sound cool. Yeah, it might sound cool, but it takes away from the concept in the end.
Yeah.
You know, you're not lonely anymore. You're with other Dons.
Yeah.
You know, maybe do kind of Zoom opera where you meet up with all your friends online and sing something.
So that leads me on quite nicely, actually, to my next question, in that the other two pieces they form part of a cycle. Obviously, this is just a standalone piece that you've written recently. Any thoughts of maybe extending it further, or is it just as it is?
No, I think this one will. I think with a few, it can be tweaked. I often find with music that I'm working on, they can be tweaked up until the deadline. And you know, but I could go on tweaking. It's just the deadline stops me. Yeah. But in terms of the concept, it kind of stands alone, lonely. It stands on its own, in a way, as an experiment into but it works as almost like kind of a sketch, if you will, for an eye. You know, there's the potential, if it were ever a thing, you know, going forward in whatever circumstance, a larger work related to the current situation we're in, and you know, whether it's kind of live projections of Zoom performances, pre-recorded stuff via internet webcams or whatever. You know, it was a useful experiment into potentially employing this kind of rather crude technology to a larger piece. You know, if you kind of view it as an artist's sketchbook in a way, perhaps.
Absolutely,
you know,
yeah.
Work in progress per se, but it just in terms of thinking rather than the piece itself.
Of course, yeah. So finally, yeah, how have the last few months kind of affected you personally as a composer?
They've been, I mean, like, you kind of imagine that the act of composing is one where you could sit down and you can just work, you know, and I do work from home quite a lot, but in a way I always need a different environment to be in order to kind of, you know, the attention dips, and so being able to go out and go to a cafe and do a bit of work there, or you know, go somewhere else. I can go for a walk, it's fine. I think I had an initial burst of inspiration, but if you like, macro terms, the inspiration dipped, and I needed to go somewhere else to work, or I needed to kind of do rehearsals or whatever. And then on a practical level, I've had 4 different premieres. It feels indefinitely postponed. Hopefully not until the not too distant future, but I just don't know. And there's a financial implication of that as well, insofar as when or if I will be paid for these pieces, which is, you know, and because I don't know, I need deadlines, personally need deadlines to focus me into finishing the pieces. And so all the while I can just kind of pontificate and bloviate around ideas and kind of big, major kind of aesthetic considerations, I essentially don't get the physical act of composing done. And even though I enjoy broadening my mind, and I feel that that is very much part of the composition process, that is all I'm doing.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not writing
Only so much, yeah.
Yeah. You know, I'm not hitting my deadlines because I don't have any. And so I've started to tread water now. You know, I want to be able to, even though I find premiere is the scariest thing, I want to be able to attend them so that at least it makes me finish the music.
It's that added motivation, isn't it, just to keep kind of going? And
yeah, absolutely. The motivation was there for a bit, and it kind of my motivation curve was flat.
And on that cheery note, it's a very interesting time, I think. And as you say, like there's this idea that people, now you've got loads more time, you'll be much more creative. But I think as you say, you need those that input to be able to be creative. You can't just find, you know, creativity in your 4 walls. And I know there might be some people that are very good at that. And I think that's been the interesting thing to come out of the last few months, is to see those people who have found stuff from nowhere and being able to do that. But I think for a lot of us, I know myself included, it's been a difficult time to try and find the impetus to keep going with that creativity.
Well, and you know, the opportunity to collaborate with you on this has certainly helped with that.
Yeah.
So thank you.
You're welcome. No, but thank you very, very much for talking to me today. And so here is Ben's piece, La. So we've come to the end of part 1 of our concert on motherhood. Part 2 will be streamed at the end of August and will feature music by Cecilia McDowell and Cheryl Francis Hode. So keep your eyes peeled on the Songs and Sounds Facebook page where you'll find more details. We must thank all of our wonderful composers, Jenni Pinnock, Emily Hall and Ben Graves, poet Kathryn Simmonds and cellist Alistair Shelton-Smith for all their fantastic contributions. We hope that you've enjoyed what you've heard, and we hope to see you again soon. So from Gavin and I, thank you very much and take care.